I've got nothing to say about CGL, the way they conduct themselves. I don't have any respect for them. They showed how little they care for our people. What we need to worry about is the safety of our people.
Tonight, a look inside the tentative deal struck with Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs and the RCMP.
You can stand up all of the elected chiefs that you want and say that you have consent, but you do not have consent from the people on the ground.
And voices against pipeline projects make themselves heard at the Prime Minister's town hall. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. We begin with more on a story that's gripped the country's attention all week, about a small group of people holding up a $40 billion pipeline project, who says the jobs and benefits that go along with it aren't worth the risk to their land and water. Here's Kathleen Martins with more.
Wednesday was day 3 of an RCMP operation here in northwestern BC. Police were taking action against a Wet'suwet'en group blocking workers from constructing the LNG natural gas pipeline. As supporters wondered how the group was doing, hereditary chiefs stepped in. They brokered a deal with the RCMP to stand down in exchange for taking down the barricades peacefully.
But this agreement is between the RCMP and ourselves, so this here does not happen to our people again.
After some of the group was arrested earlier this week here at this checkpoint. Members of the Gitumdun clan also wanted the pipeline stopped, but their vehicles and equipment were seized and 14 of them were arrested. So members of the Unistoten clan knew the police were coming. They prepared a battleground, covered the windows with blankets, and proclaimed what they were fighting for. Instead, they got an emotional reunion and some anger about how they barricaded the bridge over the Maurice River. They were tired and concerned about the agreement chiefs made with police.
That's what the family is asking here, because they find it too dangerous during the night. People coming in all hours.
And they were upset at the company they feel put them in this position.
I do care about our people. I don't work for a corporation. I don't work for a government. I work for a nation, the Wet'suwet'en. I am a chief of this nation.
Which leaves them and their healing center forever associated with a violent confrontation and facing an uncertain future. Kathleen Martins for APTN National News, outside Houston, BC.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a town hall last night in Kamloops, BC, which is a few hours' drive from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. Pipelines and broken promises to Indigenous people dominated the event. Tamara Pimentel has the story.
Do you have a deed to Shuswap territory? Have you brought one here tonight to impose your jurisdiction on us?
No, I did not.
Tensions were high in Kamloops last night as Prime Minister Trudeau took questions at a town hall meeting.
What you did to the Unistoten, that's a national disgrace.
The timing of the meeting coincides with a tense period on the Wet'suwet'en Nation. On Monday, police raided a checkpoint that was set up to keep a Trans-Canada gas pipeline out. Activists in support of the Unistoten camp were present at the meeting and outspoken. Some told APTN their drums were taken by security upon arrival.
What are you going to do to stop oppressing and holding our people under your colonization? When are you going to give us our rights back? When are you going to start giving a shit about who we are as people and not seeing us just for our land?
We have not treated Indigenous peoples as partners and stewards of this land. We have marginalized, behaved in paternalistic, colonialistic ways. We are making significant progress right now in self-governance, in new relationships, in support that is moving in the right direction.
Many Indigenous people left the meeting early in anger, others adding that when it comes to pipelines, community consent doesn't come from elected chief and council.
You do not have the consent of our Shuswap Nation Elders Council to put a pipeline through our territory. You do not have that consent. You can stand up all of the elected chiefs that you want and say that you have consent, but you do not have consent from the people on the ground.
But just hours before Trudeau came to the town hall, hereditary leaders of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation reached a tentative deal with RCMP, and they say members will allow the Coastal GasLink pipeline company to access a bridge that had been blocked. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Kamloops.
Almost all of the challenging questions for Prime Minister Trudeau came from the Indigenous people in attendance at last night's town hall. Here's more of one exchange after the microphone was given up by a woman who identified herself only as Tilly.
Why are they in our face? Why are you not putting those officers up to protect us? You're protecting a dirty pipeline, and that is not honorable. You cannot stand
Okay. If I can answer, I understand the anger and the passion that you have around this issue of protecting your land. It's absolutely to be heard. I respect that and I understand that. I also know that there are a number of Indigenous leaders who have worked with and supported that pipeline project. Now the question is, it is not for the federal government to decide who speaks for you. That's not my job. My job is to try and work with everyone, work with all of you to make sure that you are taking back control of your land, your future, your people, your destiny. And that partnership is what we're working on. And it's difficult. And it is difficult.
Leader, you are not allowed to stand there and say, this person gets to be the leader and talk on behalf of this nation. You are going about it the wrong way. You need to actually come on these lands and respect us as people.
Be a man. Come visit Uno Stoten. You know what's happening to the Wet'suwet'en Nation?
Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for sharing that. I understand your passion and your anger. I acknowledge it, and I say to you that we will work together to resolve these issues. If there was, I can understand your impatience. I can understand your impatience. I can understand your frustration. But at the same time, I do want to talk about the Indigenous.
I demand it on behalf of all my people. I want an amendment. I don't want to see your crocodile tears. I don't want to see you apologizing. I don't want to hear you say sorry. I want to see that you're sorry, and I want you to start making better choices on behalf of everybody living on this land. That means everybody that doesn't have a voice. I'm talking on behalf of all the fish that are going through the stream, all the life that depends on that fish that go up that stream. I'm talking about an entire system that you want to break down and see as a little piece by piece, and that's not the way it works. You guys need to start understanding we are living in a collective world, not a singularity. We live in a very big, connected world, and you guys are breaking so many laws. You have no idea what natural law is.
Okay, Tilly, I thank you. I thank you for what you said. I listened to what you said. I will respectfully submit that perhaps you haven't been listening to what I am saying.
A few hours south of the Unistoten camp is Stellatan First Nation. They signed with the pipeline company after 5 years of consultation and are looking forward to the project finally getting underway. Lori Hamlin visited the First Nation and has their story.
It's a quiet, snowy day in Stellatan First Nation, but the sound of drumming and singing can be heard throughout the community, and it's coming from an event at the nation's year-old Health and Wellness Center.
I wanted this so bad for our people of Stellatan.
Cynthia Munger is the community health rep for the nation, and she says the benefits agreement that her chief signed with TransCanada to build a natural gas pipeline through 30 kilometers of their territory is a good thing.
We as First Nations people have struggled for a long time, and I want our future to be bigger and brighter, even for our grandchildren, my grandchildren. I want things set in place for them so it would benefit them in the future.
And this is an example.
Exactly. A beautiful example. I am very proud of this building. I believe Stella Dan is very proud of this building, and every time we meet together here, it's always joy, and I want that to continue happening.
Stellatin First Nation is a remote community in northern BC with 600 members. Only half actually live on the reserve. Archie Patrick is the elected chief.
My objectives are simple. That's why I'm here for 7 years. I just had my third election as chief, and I got a 90% support from my membership. So it's they like what I'm doing. And basically what I'm doing is I'm saying that I want to see shelter for everyone that lives here, that is a member. I would like to see a job for everyone. Every person is capable of working. And I want to see our children go to our schools.
The chief didn't take signing with the pipeline company lightly. He spent 5 years in consultations and says money from the pipeline will be used wisely.
Obviously, we're going to get money. We're going to use it the best we can. We'll invest it. We'll try to start economic development in the territory so that we'll probably provide service. There's a whole questions of tourism.
The new Coastal GasLink pipeline will be the second pipeline to run through Stellatin's lands. The environment is a big concern for the chief and his community, but the nation's experience with the first pipeline helped give the okay for the second.
There is a pipeline through the territory just over the mountain here. It was put in 30 years ago, and it's overgrown, nothing has ever happened to it. And likely that's going to happen. There'll be a disruption for a year or so, but after that it's going to be back to normal, basically.
Although the chief is looking forward to pipeline construction, he isn't happy with how the Wet'suwet'en people against the project were treated when removed from the Gitumden blockade.
No, that's trauma, no matter how you cut it. And they indeed are responsible for the territory. It's been in our territory that's been severely destroyed because of colonialism. These people are bringing it back up, so I applaud them for that.
Laurie Hamlin, APTN National News, Stellatin First Nation.
Time for our first break, but first, here's a preview of tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what we have for you on Nation to Nation. We speak to NDP MP Nathan Cullen. He's the Member of Parliament for the riding where the Wet'suwet'en are opposing a gas pipeline project. One of the things he says is that Prime Minister Trudeau needs to show more leadership on this issue. As well, Cindy Blackstock continues to fight the federal government. She says it's not using Jordan's principle to care for a critically ill 20-month-old non-status child. And nearly 24 Ontario First Nations are expecting a raise in their annual treaty payments. This after a court victory just before the holidays. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here is Friday's weather forecast beginning on the East Coast. 1 in St. John's, -2 and cloudy in Halifax, -4 in Nain, -3 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. In Quebec City, -14 and snow, -14 and cloud in Montreal. Sun and -5 in Toronto, -2 in Windsor. -10 and snow in Wawa, cloud and -4 in Thunder Bay. In northern Manitoba, -25 in Churchill, -19 in Norway House, -10 and cloud in Gimli, -12 in Brandon. Welcome back. Indigenous leadership gathered on Long Plain First Nations Urban Reserve in Winnipeg today. They released a report that challenges the view that First Nations in Manitoba are a burden on taxpayers. Ashley Branson brings us this.
In 2016, Indigenous people added $9.3 billion in Manitoba's economy. That's according to a new report called Indigenous Contributions to the Manitoba Economy. Its data gives a clearer picture of the economic impact of Indigenous people in the province. The report is a collaboration between Southern Chiefs Organization, Manitoba, Kiiwetinoong, Ogimakinak, and the Rural Development Institute of Brandon University. Southern Chiefs Organization Grand Chief Jerry Daniels explains why it was important to implement this analysis.
We want to bring clarity. You know, there's a lot of misconceptions and you know, people don't really have a good understanding of the reality that's really happening. And so this is an opportunity for us to state for the record that Indigenous peoples are creating huge impacts on the economy, and they're going to continue to do so with the growing trend of workforce and businesses going forward.
The report says the Indigenous economy added $2.3 billion to the provincial gross domestic product. That represents 3.9% of Manitoba's GDP. That's more than manufacturing, accommodations and food services, mining or oil and gas extraction. Manitoba, Kiiwetinoong, Ogimakinak Grand Chief Garrison Setti says this is a historical day and this is only the beginning.
So now it is incumbent upon us to invest in training, in education, so the youth, the demographic of the youth is exploding. And in the future, that is what we have to work with. And we must invest in education and training to allow the youth to continue to be stronger participants.
Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
There are about 5,000 children currently in the Saskatchewan child welfare system, and approximately 80% of those children are Indigenous. Last year, 41 Indigenous youth in child welfare were adopted out. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations is demanding an immediate stop on all adoptions for First Nations youth in the province. The federal government is expected to pass legislation that will reassign authority over Indigenous youth back to First Nations in Canada. The FSIN say they have rightful jurisdiction over their children in care and want the provincial government to stop adoptions.
And not only are we going to take it over, we're going to succeed. We're going to be able to do what the province of Saskatchewan has failed to do, and that's to protect our children, and that's to ensure that our children have a safe community and environment to live in, all while building a healthy identity of who they are and where they come from.
There's a new episode of APTN Investigates tomorrow night. We've been talking about the blockade on a new pipeline all week. But what about the mess left behind after the oil dries up? Investigates reporter John Murray set out to find answers in his episode Orphans on the Land. Here is a preview.
Alberta. Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 nations are here, as well as the Métis. It's also a place where oil and gas have boomed, driving the economy for several decades. The role for First Nations and Métis over the years has varied.
The last 10, 15 years, the First Nations, wait a minute, we want to be more involved. So we have a lot more band-owned companies, are a lot more involved in the oil and gas development.
The oil and gas has really made a big difference for our people, not only in terms of collecting the royalties, but also providing jobs for some of our members.
But the oil and gas industry is also leaving a toxic legacy behind.
Just a little bit up here, not even an eighth of a mile, I know that I personally have shot moose, and we've used it for sustenance, and you know, here we have this area again decimated.
Some compare it to Yellowknife's Giant Mine, but on a much bigger scale, across an entire province.
Their estimate is that there's $260 billion in cleanup, and they currently hold much less than $2 billion in security against that.
And that bill is far more money than the industry has contributed.
All of these liabilities being piled on into the Orphan Wells Association, and no money to pay for it.
That tab doesn't even include fixes to aging infrastructure like pipelines that have a potential for disaster. Could it become a public burden?
You better run, run, run.
Regardless of who pays the bill, billions of dollars of work needs to be done.
When the devil calls your name.
A new exhibit in Ontario is merging the work of one Ojibwe artist with a famous Canadian painter. More on that after the break. Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in Alberta. -7 in Sun in Fort McMurray, -8 in Peace River, 0 degrees in Edmonton, +4 in Calgary. On the west coast, 3 degrees in Kamloops, 10 above in Victoria, -10 in Dease Lake, 2 degrees in Smithers. In the Yukon, chilly -35 in Rock River, -34 in Dawson. Over to the NWT, -21 in Fort Simpson, sun in -22 in Fort Liard, -30 in sun in Colville Lake, -29 in Saxe Harbor. In Nunavut, -32 in Baker Lake, chilly -33 in Cambridge Bay, -29 in sun in Clyde River. An Ojibwe artist with a unique talent is sharing space with a member of a group of Canadian landscape painters called the Group of Seven. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
There's a train track where we used to basically catch the train. So we used to catch the CN train and get off. And so my grandparents lived there. So it's sort of remembering those places.
Michael Belmore has been creating things ever since he was a kid.
My mom used to always just force me to throw things out because I would collect things and make things out of styrofoam and tape. And I'd make Star Wars spaceships and stuff like that.
That natural talent led him to a career as a professional sculptor. Some of his work now sits alongside a Group of 7 artists, A.J. Casson. Curator Wasandoy Cross says it's an emergence of 2 viewpoints.
It was to show the different layers, I guess, that are behind these landscapes and these places. It's not just about the beauty. Casson captures the light and the landscape and what you see at eye level, whereas Michael, he uses a bird's eye view, and he uses a lot of maps and also bring it in his own knowledge, about specific places that are important to the Anishinaabe people.
Many of Belmore's sculptures are maps from the area where he grew up, north of Thunder Bay. He works mostly with copper and stone. He says for the Anishinaabe, copper is the blood of the Manitous and the Thunderbirds.
I work with making maps and territories and sort of looking at very material-based processes. So I like to hammer copper. So all the work that's in the exhibition is actually made from sheets of copper, and I use a 4-pound sledgehammer, and basically what I do is I hammer watersheds. So I hammer lakes and rivers, and I do it in basically a sandbox. So what happens is as I hammer the copper or hammer the lakes and the rivers, that sinks down, and what that does is actually pushes the land up. So it's actually this process called chasing and repoussé.
Belmore's work will be on display at the Ottawa Art Gallery until mid-March. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
And it is with great sadness we bid farewell to Ottawa reporter Annette Francis. Tomorrow is her last day. Annette started in the Ottawa Bureau in May 2007. She's covered many important stories and events, including the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal on child welfare and Idle No More. Chimigwech Annette, thank you for all your hard work. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. That's it for tonight. I'm Brittany Hobson. Stick around for Nation to Nation coming up next.